As a community, we build empathy, curiosity, joy, and connection when we share stories with you. Welcome to Storytellers Project, part of the USA Today Network.
Hello. Welcome to the Des Moines Storytellers Project. We are so thrilled to be back on our home stage after a 2-year hiatus. Our last show here was in February 2020, and well, we all know what happens next. I want to thank you for taking a chance on live storytelling tonight and spending your evening with us. It means the world to us to build community together in this way. My name is Kim Norvell, and I'm a reporter at the Des Moines Register, the director of content for the Storytellers Project, and your host for the evening. The Storytellers Project is sponsored by Extreme, powered by Mediacom, and we want to thank them for their support of live storytelling and the power it has to start important conversations and build community. It's also sponsored by Noah's Ark Ristorante, which has been serving home-style Italian food on Ingersoll Avenue since 1946. Consider making them a part of your family and stop by for lunch or dinner Wednesday through Saturday. We also want to say thank you to Hoyt Sherman Place for opening up this beautiful historic venue to us. The Des Moines Storytellers Project believes that everyone has a story and everyone can tell that story. Tonight is about live storytelling, which is sort of like dishing with your best friend about the best or worst date you've ever been on. It's not a TED Talk or an open mic night. As you listen, I want you to remember that none of our storytellers are professionals. They're our friends, neighbors, and coworkers. Each of them has been coached by a registered journalist to perfect their true first-person stories, and they're telling them live on stage tonight without notes and from their hearts. Their willingness to share their experiences is what makes these nights possible, so let's please give them a round of applause. Tonight's theme is love, stories of companionship, desire, and commitment. You'll hear stories of self-love, romantic love, and love that was lost. Whether you're in a relationship or flying solo, I promise you'll find a deeper connection to one of the most universal experiences we all share. So please join me in turning off your cell phones and getting lost in these stories. Our first storyteller tonight may be a familiar face. Linh Taw will tell us a story about what it takes to truly love yourself.
Here in Des Moines, thousands upon thousands of miles away from the home they first knew, my parents met. My dad always thought my mom was the prettiest girl in town. She had a few other feelings about him, but eventually they got to know each other, fell in love, and married. Two people with dreams of a fruitful life, born through a Vietnamese restaurant and a family. Now, we all know the story about how I was shown as a beacon of hope when the Vietnam War displaced refugees. Thousands of people came here, my parents included. But then, what happened? On an April day, Duc Taw and Ton Nguyen Taw had me. They chose the name Linh, L-I-N-H, both because it's a common Vietnamese name, but also they thought, hey, Iowans could pronounce this. Joke's on them. Sometimes they can't. There was no guidebook for how we were supposed to live our lives here. No grandma's Thanksgiving recipe passed down. No creaky old house where generations upon generations of our family lived. We were just like seeds in the air, trying to find land that wouldn't spit us back out. And behind the scenes, I was quickly growing into an American child of the 2000s, where I demanded a Game Boy Color, beads in my hair, and a growing desire to become more like a Linda versus a Lynn. When I was 10 years old, I had a huge crush on the neighbor boy. With his brown hair and bright blue eyes, we would build sand castles in his backyard, and I would twist up little blades of grass, making rings, one for him, one for me. Sometimes he'd invite me over for dinner with his family, and we'd sit around their laminate table, hands clasped together in prayer. That's where I made my discovery for the first time of 5-minute rice with butter, which I politely shoveled under some other food. They were so freely nice, telling me that I could come over whenever and that I could play on their swing set. Meanwhile, my family, like many other Asian families, there was a lot of love between us, but with others, there was a bit of reservation that could come off as coldness. And that meant misunderstood interactions, lots of no's when I asked if kids could come over, and a general conception from other people that, well, if they don't like us, then we don't like them. One day, after a particularly fun day of playing with the neighbor boy, I went to my mom and asked, "Can he please come over for dinner?" And to my surprise, she said, "Sure." I was ecstatic. This rarely, if ever, happened. That night, he came over and we talked about school and Game Boy Colors. He was my best friend, and to have him at my table with me, I was elated. But across the table, she didn't have to say it. I could sense it. The judgment. We finished up our dinner and he went home. Later that night, I went up to my mom and asked, "So, what did you think of him?" Her immediate response, "Rude. No please, no thank you. Shoes on inside the house." I went to defend his reputation as she felt like she was defending mine. We argued that night as she was washing the dishes by hand, even though we have a dishwasher right there. I was embarrassed. I was embarrassed that, in her eyes, I chose wrong. I was embarrassed that we were the family that always had to act a certain way, that American families, Iowan families, they were always so warm and welcoming, and we were so utterly not. Years later, when the neighbor boy and I were both teenagers in middle school, we rode the bus together. Well, not together, no. We had reached the age of self-awareness where one small move can mean total social calamity in the world of teenage hierarchy. I was no longer the cute elementary-aged kid. New school, new students, acne-ridden. I had a new identity that year. That Asian kid. And to be honest, it was an identity that I both felt restricted by, but also embraced. I leaned into stereotypes, saying, "I'm great at math," when I'm not great at math. And I made friends with the other Asian kids and had a sense of camaraderie that I really had never had before. But one day, when I was sitting on the bus with the other Asian kids, the neighbor boy, the one who knew me, turned to us and asked, "Did you guys get your ching chong names from your parents throwing pots and pans down the stairs?" I was able to brush off most of the comments from the kids, but that one hurt. That one I wasn't protected from. It was a reminder that no matter how hard I tried, no matter how much I wanted to assimilate, that first and foremost, I was that Asian kid. Plus, our stairs were carpeted. He knew that. Being a second-generation immigrant, it's a wave that you learn to ride. When your great aunt gives you a bar of soap and points to your face, you say, "Yep, I know, don't worry. There's this new 3-step process called proactive. I'm taking care of it." When a white guy on Tinder messages you and asks, "So, do you like anime?" Well, duh, but no, swipe left, swipe left. But there were the more serious moments as well. There were the jokes that I let slide by that I shouldn't have, and there were the parts of myself that I felt slip away. Things that I should have held dear in me, like my mother's eyes or my father's tan skin. But even among the people that I looked like, I feared their judgment as well. Too American for the Asian people, but too Asian for the American people. While I could help my family write their resumes, I could barely speak to my own grandmother in Vietnamese. And while I eventually became okay with being a Lin, there was an uncomfortable gray area that I sat in for a long time. But love changes things. And loving yourself is oh so hard, but loving somebody else and seeing parts of you in them, well, it makes it a little bit easier to love yourself as well. And for me, things started to change when I watched my little cousins grow up. Now, this next generation of my family, they are not shy about being themselves, which is why I know way too much about Harry Styles and YouTube makeup drama right now. And even at school, I love seeing how they're not shy about their identity and sharing parts of their heritage with the other kids. But I will say there was this one time that my little cousin came up to me upset because she said there was a boy at school who went up to her and asked her if she ate woof woof. Boy, you know I was ready to beat up a kid after that. But that's when I realized all those years ago, my parents, they were just trying to protect me because they loved me. And I loved them for trying to keep me safe in the best way that they knew how and keeping me away from the instant judgment that this world can sometimes give. And I love my cousins for being exactly who they are. And when they reach that age of self-awareness, I want them to look at me and see that I love myself as well and that there is nothing to be ashamed of. And when I think about my adult life now, so many years later, and all of the different kinds of people that I have that love and accept me for who I am, well, I'm forever thankful. And as for my parents, well, they've been bothering me about when I'm going to bring a nice person to the house. Thank you.
Thank you, Lynn. We are so glad that you found acceptance in your family and culture. Next up, we have David Greiser, who will tell us a story about following his heart.
My story begins in December of 1968 in Brookings, South Dakota. That's where I met Jude. We were polar opposites. For example, I liked summers. She liked winters. She was among the quiet type, whereas I liked to party. But those differences represented a kind of excitement, and I could envision our being in a relationship with one another. There was only one problem. It was the diamond ring on her left hand. I was a senior at South Dakota State University, and in another semester I would have my bachelor's degree. I had just broken up with my girlfriend, Jill, for no particular reason. As with other guys on campus, I guess I liked the idea of playing the field. In addition, going too long with Jill, or even going too long with any girl for that matter, could have ended up being something permanent. And I certainly did not want to have that happen. The only exception, maybe Jude. Now, Jude had her associate's degree in lab technology, and during the preceding summer, she had moved from northern Minnesota to Brookings in order to accept her very first full-time job as a lab tech at the Brookings Municipal Hospital. Now, my roommate knew her roommate, and these two women invited us for dinner one evening at their apartment. It was December 14th. I immediately liked Jude, and after dinner, we went to another room so we could talk privately. That's how I learned that we didn't have a single thing in common. But you know, it really didn't seem to matter. The longer we talked, the more I thought that Jude could be that person with whom I could spend a lifetime. She thought that person was her fiancé. She was going to marry the same guy that she had dated all through high school. Jude was ready to return to Eveleth, Minnesota, her hometown of 5,000 people dedicated to everything hockey. Her wedding would be in March. Everything was set. The church was reserved. The pastor was ready. Her parents had the place for the reception. Her 5 bridesmaids had already bought their identical dresses. And Jude and her husband would make their home in Eveleth, where they would live ever after. Despite Jude's leaving Brookings permanently, or maybe because of her leaving Brookings permanently, we began seeing one another every day. We went to one another's apartment. We went to movies together. We went to restaurants. That engagement ring may have been assigned to other guys that she was off limits, but I could let people think that maybe this poverty-stricken college student had given it to her. We had invested so much time in one another that we didn't want to end it. And I eventually told Jude that she should get married in March. Not to a man in Minnesota, though, but to me. And one evening, as we sat on her sofa and listened to Strangers in the Night by Frank Sinatra, in a long-playing vinyl record album, I leaned over and asked, "Will you marry me?" Now, if she said yes, she was bound to wonder whether staying in Eveleth, especially with people that she had known since childhood, may have created more stability for her. On the other hand, if she said no to me, she would undoubtedly find times at which she would ask herself whether she may have lost some adventures or some opportunities by not embracing some new environment. See, there were opportunity costs with each choice. Jude's choice was to back away from the engagement and return the engagement ring, the diamond ring. Her parents were stunned. Her fiancé, her ex-fiancé, went into crisis mode. He even boarded an airplane to Brookings so that he could talk with Jude face to face about the weather whether he could convince her to marry. And if there were any individuals in Eveleth who were prone to gossip, well, here was an entirely new topic. We had invested so much time in one another that we didn't want it to end. And Jude had asked her parents for permission to let me go home with them, to go home with her on a weekend so they could meet me. But the answer was always, it's simply too soon. You have to give this community time to recover from what you have done. It had become clear to us that we were not going to get support from anyone except maybe from our roommates. And so by February, we had made the decision to dispense with invitations and wedding things altogether. We just wanted to leave it all behind us. What we did need, however, was someone to officiate the wedding. And the logical man to do it would be a justice of the peace. Whatever we did, though, we had to keep it out of the Brookings newspaper. Otherwise, someone who knew Jude could tell her parents. So the solution would be to find an out-of-town justice. Aurora, South Dakota was a community of maybe 300 people or so, just a little bit east of Brookings. It probably didn't even have a newspaper. So Jude and I drove to Aurora. We went to the town hall and asked to meet with the Justice of the Peace. The Justice of the Peace happened to be my former girlfriend Jill's mother. For real. Whenever I think of Jill's mom and her willingness to marry us, I think of, I remember, I remember an eagerness in her demeanor. No, it was an over-eagerness. Then Jude and I began questioning why we were ready to get married in March, when February was a much more romantic month. Her roommate could be her bridesmaid, and my best man could be my roommate. So Monday, we found our ideal wedding bands and even had our names engraved in the insides of the rings. On Tuesday, we got our marriage license. Wednesday, we got these blood tests, which the state of South Dakota required at that time. On Thursday, we discovered what people would call a miraculous cake, wedding cake. Now, it was only one small cake, one tier, no tears. That was not a great pun, but thank you. And Friday, after Jude finished work and I was through with classes, we fought a blizzard all the way to Aurora, and then waited an hour for our roommates to show. But it was Valentine's Day. We had eloped. February 14th was exactly 2 months from the day that we first met. The next day, I called my parents to tell them that they had a daughter-in-law. Jude didn't call her parents, though. She was waiting for them to say they're ready to meet me. And that wouldn't be for several weeks. When they did consent, she told them in a letter that we already were married. A letter which would arrive on the same day that we did. I felt that we were being very thoughtful. They didn't have to make up 2 beds after all. I'll always remember the day that the father and mother-in-law met the son-in-law. It was a day that I would later describe as an incarnation of anxiety. But the anxiety didn't last long. Her parents and I developed a friendship before Jude and I had to go back to Brookings. And it was a friendship that would become even deeper the longer we were married. The gossip persisted. When is the baby due? The baby wouldn't be due for 2 more years. A daughter. And 2 years after that, we would have a son. And in an additional 3 years, we would have a second son. When one of my associates remarked how good-looking my kids were, he added, "The mother must be attractive." Today, the 3 of them are educated, have rewarding careers and children of their own, and Jill's still, Jude. No. Jude is still being given credit for those good genes. This story may not have an ending, but I would like to conclude by sharing with you one more comment. It's also from 1969, the year we were married. It is, well, that's one marriage that won't last forever. Maybe they're right. Maybe it won't last forever. After all, as of yesterday, it's been only 53 years. Thank you. Now, at this very moment, Jude, my polar opposite, is right down here in the front of the auditorium. During our 53 years together, I have come to believe that one genuine woman in an ever-evolving relationship can provide more variety than several girlfriends. Also, I've come to believe that every day offers something compelling. And among all the random events which have affected our lives, we have internalized the ones which have kept the 2 of us newlyweds. Thank you.
Good job. Thank you, David. Happy anniversary to you and Jude. All right, we have one more story for you before intermission, but first we must thank our last sponsor, Fairy Tale Brownies. Fairy Tale Brownies believes what we do, that it's through stories, whether fairy tales, myths, or legends, that we pass down our most important values. At Fairy Tale Brownies, they believe all stories are better with a sweet ending. Learn more about them at brownies.com. I'll now introduce Presha Paulding, who will tell us a story about the darker side of love.
We've all heard that love is a many-splendored thing, right? And we all know that's not necessarily true. But it should never be a questioning or a confusing thing either. You know, I was in a long-term relationship, And I still only half assumed that we were, well, good. Okay, so even though I never heard those 3 words, I love you, you know, we called each other all the time, we hung out, we went on trips, we lived separately, but we were together all the time, you know, we were exclusive. And so, I loved him, and but I convinced myself that I didn't need to hear those 3 words, that, you know, it was for a younger generation, and I wasn't that needy that I needed to be told. And so I convinced myself that that kind of love, that was our own love language, our lack of expressing love. Yeah. Well, I thought it would be one that we would grow old together speaking. Well, I met this person. I met him at a Facebook comedy group. I was immediately attracted to his wit and his intellect. He was fun, and he was funny, and, well, he seemed really attracted to me, which was very refreshing. And so we were the same age, and we liked music, we liked theater, we liked comedy, so we seemed to be the perfect match. Seemed to be. And so then you know, he had been married before, and but he was a solo kind of guy, and he didn't want to be alone necessarily, you know. So the most I could say is that we were in like with each other. And so in thinking about it, I'm thinking that I was more like a therapy dog than a girlfriend. Oh, now, I don't mean that as a put down to myself, or even a dog for that matter. No, dogs are great. Dogs are great. They are great teachers on unconditional love. They can be chewing on the best bone in the planet, and you walk in, they're like, yeah! And they drop everything, and they give you all that deserved attention. And that was me. I gave him my undivided attention. So there it was, and so we had, like I said, a long-term relationship, and it started out romantic, and then it turned robotic, and then from robotic to platonic. Okay? You feel sad for me now? Well, you'll feel more sad after this. It lasted 3 years that way. Okay, well, that is until he found someone, and then he loudly proclaimed the L word, just not for me, just for someone else. Okay, so how did that happen? Well, you know, some of it might have had to do with my own relationship history, okay, rather than him. I'll give him that. I had been married before, and that marriage was not so great, and we had a lot of disagreements and confrontations that I learned to shy away from those serious conversations. And I felt unlovable, felt guilty and inadequate, and then I just kind of shied away from any kind of confrontation. And I got confused about what I wanted and what my needs were. And then combine that with the fact that I had parents that were not necessarily in a happy marriage. And so I didn't exactly have a great game plan on what a great relationship was. And I didn't exactly know how to recognize subtle signs, you know, warning signs that were really important. And there were warning signs. I just chose to ignore them. Okay, so when I hear someone say, my boyfriend or my girlfriend, they broke up with me, I didn't see that coming. I thought we were good. I say, I get ya. I do, and then I say, you know, really? Maybe You chose not to see the signs or even ask the important questions. Okay? I know I didn't. Okay. For example, first warning sign maybe. Okay. He never gave me permission to put "in a relationship" on Facebook. Okay. After 6 years, if we weren't in a relationship, what were we? Another one is, he never saw or met all my children until the last year we were together, and I have 6 grown children. Okay, you can't have a relationship with someone that you haven't met, right? And I met all his family. I met his children, extended family. I went to all the reunions, the Christmas parties, the special events. He just didn't do the same in return. And then I realized he only shared in parts of my life that he wanted to. And I just didn't let myself see it. Now, this next one, it's going to sound narcissistic, but it isn't. Trust me. And he never told me he thought I was beautiful. Now, you can be the ugliest person on the planet, but you still want to hear from your significant other that you are it, that you are attractive. So I never heard it, but I do remember one instance where he actually showed appreciation for my appearance. And it was a day when I just was not feeling good at all. It's just one of those days where you feel icky, and I was like in sweats, and I had no makeup, and my hair was all kind of like greasy looking, pulled back in a ponytail, and I had these huge reader glasses on, and I had said, sure, I'll go with you to run some errands. So I come out, and I'm like this, and I go get into the car on the passenger side, and I look over, and I go, and he's looking at me with, "I want you now." Okay, as he's nodding, and he goes, "I like." I'm like, really? I mean, no, normally something like that would be very sweet, right? But he didn't say it. He didn't say it as something to make me feel better for looking so crappy. He liked the crappy look. And that's a look that I could only obtain like at Halloween or cosplay or something. And then there was the pot roast. Oh my goodness, I didn't know a pot roast could be so telling. So we traveled out of state to go spend the weekend at his mom's. And we were gonna stay there, and so when we got there, pot roast was on the menu. Oh, we ate it, and it was great. We loved it. And then later on that night, we're in the spare bedroom, and we're all alone, and we're in the dark. And I'm thinking, we're already 8 months into this platonic thing. And I'm like, I just think I'll kind of snuggle up for a little. And I'm just going to look for a response, maybe. I got one. It wasn't what I wanted, but I got one. And so, after a little kissing, a little making out, you could hear us, breathing in the dark, and in all that excitement for me, I'm just imagining in my head he's gonna say something so wonderful, and I could just hear him breathing, and I could imagine he's gonna say, "Oh, I've missed your touch. Oh, your kisses, they set me on fire. I'll never be distant from you again." Oh, and here it was. He was breathing, and I could hear him taking a breath. And there it was, those unforgettable words. Man, that pot roast was good. All right. So if that didn't do it, there was this. When we went on our travels, our road trips together, his favorite CD to play was Gordon Lightfoot, which, by the way, we saw on this stage together. Thank you, Gordon, for the memories. So Gordon Lightfoot, yes, was his favorite CD, and he would play it. Guess what his favorite song to play was? If You Could Read My Mind. Any Gordon Lightfoot fans out there know the last line goes, and the feeling's gone, and I just can't get it back. I'm not slow. So, well, okay, so finally it clicks. I gotta ask some very important questions, but it took me a minute, about 628,000 to be exact, and any math students out there, no, that's 5 years. So I'm gonna be subtle with this, and I'm gonna sneak it into a conversation. So we're at a favorite deli, and we're sitting there, and I'm like, oh my gosh, okay, this is the time. I'm actually gonna ask questions. And so I knew he was a Cardinals fan, so I was gonna slip it in the conversation like this. I said, wow, the Cardinals. The Cards really knocked it out of the park today. Are we romantically involved? The look on his face was, I didn't know we were gonna have this conversation. I'm thinking to myself, I bet you didn't. He stood up and he said, no, we're not romantically involved. And then he left. And then I sat there and I just stared at his uneaten sandwich for about an hour and a half. It was so pathetic. And I had other questions, but that kind of answered it. So, all right, so we're gonna fast forward 10 months later. Oh yes, I'm still hanging on. I'm still hanging on. 10 months later, he knocks at my door, which was uncharacteristic for him. We were gonna open a show in a couple weeks. And so he said, oh, I just wanna come over and I wanna run our lines. I'm like, well, okay, come on in. And so we ran our lines for the show. And then he looks at me with those big blue eyes and he smiles and he says, I got something to tell you. And I'm thinking, yay! After 10 months, I bet he thought about that conversation at the deli, and I bet he changed his answer. I bet we're gonna redefine our love relationship. We're even gonna go official on Facebook. So he looks over at me and he touches my hand and he goes, I found someone, and I'm really happy. I mean, and you're really happy? I mean, like you weren't happy before? I mean, to steal from the wedding singer, that is information I could have used yesterday. You know, when someone says those words to you, it kind of hits you right there in the solar plexus. And you think of all the responses that you want to say. You want to take the high road, but the low road seems so much more satisfying. So these responses, they play out in your head. And so there's like the saintly response that goes, well, isn't that just wonderful? Well, good for you. And then there is the voice of reason, more objective voice that says, oh, well, that's a surprise. You've not known each other long. Well, are you sure? Well, okay. And then there is the passive, if not sarcastically aggressive, post-primal scream response that says, well, good for you. I sure hope she likes Mom's pot roast. My actual response was silence. And so, there it was. Then 2 weeks later, we got to open that show, and there he comes into the venue with his new girlfriend, 16 years, his junior, with her grown children. Couldn't like do anything with my children, but and they sit in the front row so they could watch our final performance. Oh, that was sweet. That was good times. And then, a couple months later, they were engaged. And then, a couple months later after that, they were married. Well, so good for them. And they got true love, and I got confused. And then I realized I wasn't the one. You know, I was just the stand-in. I was the understudy. I was the teacher substitute. I was just the one for now until he found the one. And then I realized something else that was very important. It took me a while, but that all that time, I had been wanting his validation. And then I found out all I really needed was my own. Now, it took me a long time to stop being angry. And I don't mean at him, I mean at myself. But then I finally did, and I discovered the greatest relationship takeaway ever, and I'm going to share it. The greatest relationship takeaway ever is this: if he or she loves you, you're going to know it. If he or she doesn't, you're going to be confused. Right? I mean, a person, your significant, lover, whatever, is not going to leave you in doubt because they're not going to want to risk losing you. Love is never a question. Love is, it's an answer. Oh, it's risk, it's hard work, it's patience, it's sacrifice, but it's also joyful, it's peaceful, it's life-giving, and it's intentional. Okay, I realized that one thing I needed to do that I hadn't done, it was give myself the same amount of love, the same amount of attention and forgiveness that I would give to someone else in a relationship, right? I needed to love me, and maybe you do too. And so maybe after some healing time, you know, and maybe even after some therapy, I mean, do like Adele did. I mean, take that horrible heartbreak and you turn it into a multi-million-dollar recording. And so for me, after 7 years, my multi-million-dollar jackpot takeaway is I want someone who is playful, adventurous, monogamous, funny, adorable, kind, who loves me unconditionally. I think I just described myself. Hey, I think I'd even date me. So in closing, I think you'll be happy to know, I know I am, that I have found that special guy who absolutely loves me unconditionally, right? Yay. And yay for me. And how do I know this? That is so easy. He's a dog. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Carol Hunter, Executive Editor of the Des Moines Register, and I am so thrilled to be part of welcoming you back to live storytelling and to this beautiful theater. It's been a long time coming. I want to thank you for being here, in part because your attendance helps support the storytelling done by the Register's journalists. And they've been doing some fine storytelling lately, and I want to tell you about a few of those stories. A couple of them by storytelling coaches here tonight. One of them, Courtney Crowder, has been spending a lot of time up at Mary Greeley Medical Center in Ames. I hope you've been following her work. She and Zach Boyden Holmes have been telling the story of the exhausted staff and their ongoing efforts to save lives from COVID-19. This last Sunday, we published a story of theirs about an unvaccinated man, 61, from LeGrand, Iowa, and his daughter, and the heartbreaking decisions that she was having to make as he battled long COVID and the staff fought to try to save his life. Courtney and Zach were in the room when that man passed. I also am very proud of a story that storytellers coach Lee Rude wrote. Lee, of course, is our reader's watchdog. She does investigative journalism. And she produced a fine package about Traverse Mortgage Corporation. It manages low-income apartments across the state of Iowa, but tenants there told Lee about unsanitary conditions, about pest infestations, lack of hot and cold water, confusing billings that didn't look the same each month. It's kind of a classic case of watchdog journalism in that powerful people were apparently taking advantage of not so powerful people, and no one was doing anything about it until Lee Rude showed up to start reporting. Then magically, managers who hadn't been responding to these complaints for months showed up to meet with tenants. Maintenance staff showed up and fixed some plumbing and did some other work. And some state and federal officials say that they're going to start looking into the operations of this company. And you can bet that our reader's watchdog is going to keep her eye on them. I want to leave you with one more story that's to leave you on a more uplifting note. And this has become one of my favorite stories of the year already, and it's by our sports enterprise reporter, Tommy Birch. He wrote about a 15-year-old young man named Isaiah Picard, who swims for the Indianola High School swimming team. Isaiah was born with spina bifida and uses a wheelchair. But this past weekend, he became the first ever para-athlete to participate in the high school swimming meet. Now, many of our journalists spend a lot of their time writing about when things go wrong, as Lee Rude's been doing. But I just love this story because it's about a lot of people doing things right. His parents got Isaiah in the pool starting at age 3. They ferried him back and forth to practices all these years. Isaiah himself put in the work, and as a high schooler, that means 2-hour practices every weekday morning. And then his coach, 2 of his coaches, the athletic director, other swim coaches in Iowa, they took the initiative to go to the Iowa High School Athletic Association and petition that para-swimming become a sanctioned high school sport in Iowa. And that's what allowed Isaiah to swim. And I love it because it reminds me of the goodness of the people in our community. And we need more stories like that right now. Let's thank you again for supporting our Register's journalist storytelling. and for the live storytelling on the stage tonight. Let's hear some more good stories. Thank you.
Our next storyteller tonight is Chad Elliott, who will tell us a story about what it's like to write a love song.
Please allow me to set the stage for you. Way back, I was love struck in South Dakota. I'm riding in the backseat clutter of a rust on white 20-year-old Dodge Dynasty. My brother's up front riding shotgun. My good friend is riding next to him at the helm, and he grips the red leather steering wheel as it shivers from the speed we're going because we're flying west through the night to Montana. Missoula, Montana, where I had only recently dropped out of grad school to feverishly write love songs. Like crazy amounts of love songs. Like, is he safe to be among the general population? Amounts of love songs. And these love songs had but one muse, and she was still out there in beautiful Montana. So, like Don Quixote in a Dodge Dynasty, I had found my mission. I was to ride out into the mountains and declare my love for her in song. Yes, I would warble out my best sonnet and win her heart. My two travel companions, not so much. They were going hiking, and we arrived in Missoula early the next dawn, and we went immediately to the trailhead, and I watched them walk off into the woods as I turned immediately back around, and I started my way back to town. And I was getting more and more nervous as I got closer and closer to her house. But I even found myself picking these little pathetic little purple flowers along the roadside. It was sickeningly sweet. You know, as I got closer and closer, I began to feel that rush of adrenaline from the unfolding surprise. But you see, the surprise was on me, because I had learned immediately as I stepped onto her front door stoop from her roommate that she was actually 500 miles west in Seattle moving in with an ex-boyfriend. I was heartbroken, and I was defeated, and I walked away from her house searching for any way out of the embarrassment and the pain, and trying to find an excuse how I was going to tell my brother and my friend. And I started my way back up to the trailhead. My cheeks were still flush from the original exhilaration. That's when it happened. This little melody flickered to life in my imagination. And I began humming the words to this brand new song. It went like this. I picked a purple flower for you. I left the gold ones on the hill. I picked a purple flower for you, and I left it on your windowsill. An element of surprise with the sun up high in the air. I rang your bell about 3 or 4 times, but you were not there. Yeah, it was at this moment that I realized that writing love songs can make the bullshit of life totally worth it. I write love songs for a living. I mean, yes, I write other songs, but mostly they're love songs. And for 24 years now, I have poured out my heart and soul to strangers in bars, coffee houses, churches, American Legion halls, backyards, and everywhere in between. And I've learned after 2 decades of doing this, singing songs from the heart, that there's a specific art to writing a love song. This love feverish trip out to Montana illustrates one of those lessons, is that there, first and foremost, there must be longing and vulnerability. In order to really connect with an audience, you must dare to play the fool. And boy, have I. Another lesson in writing a love song is that oversharing is essential. My love songs are like snapshots of my private life. And they're like pages ripped out of my leather-bound journal, sometimes literally. And there's also this, that a good song almost always will mean different things to different people. Take my best and saddest song that I've ever written. It was about my divorce. And the irony is, I've been asked to sing this divorce song at 2 weddings and an anniversary celebration in Mexico. Yeah. I'll repeat that. I have flown down to Mexico. I was flown down to Mexico to sing my divorce song, the most heart-wrenching time of my life, as this happily married couple danced the night away. The song itself is about this awkward conversation that I thought only applied to me. It was, but anybody who's been through a divorce understands, especially when children are involved, that there's this awkward dance in the post-divorce conversation over the phone where you're each trying to move on, but also honor the family you've began. In the Midwest, we tend to talk about safe things, don't we? Things that we have in common, like the weather. Hence the song's title, How's the Weather? And I'm still baffled at the process, the life of a song, from scribbling it in my little journal to recording it to the listener's ears. It's kind of like a chain of people where you whisper a secret at one end, and by the time it reaches the last person, it's completely transformed into something else. This thought came to mind as I stood there on that terracotta tiled veranda in Ixtapa, Mexico, as this couple danced 10 feet from me, and I was singing these very personal lines. How is home? How's that job? How's that child that you and I brought into the world? How he's grown. How he's so much like you and me together. How's the weather? I go on to describe this thunderstorm like looming down and the end of a chapter in a love story. How does that become a marriage song? I don't know. But I've learned to embrace and even cherish these many diverse perspectives on this, my best and saddest song. One more lesson in the art of writing a love song is that a good song will have a power of its own. Sometimes it's more power than the author even knows. I once wrote a song years ago that I thought was just this throwaway song. I recorded this rough demo of it, and I sang it a few times, and I didn't think much of it, but people really, really responded to it, and they really loved it. And it was called Shining Stars, and I was just thought it was a selfish love song that I wrote for one individual. But like I said, songs have this power of their own, and they seem to grow and they wander into other people's hearts, only to return again to reveal their own power through the lives that they touch. This was never more true than I found myself singing this song at my mother-in-law's funeral, or mother-in-law to be. You see, I was about to be remarried, my second marriage, and when 6 days before this wedding, my wife-to-be and I woke up to the terrible news that she fell asleep and just didn't wake up. We were sent into this tailspin of grief and confusion as people, family members and friends were flying from all over for our wedding, only to land to give us condolences instead of congratulations. It was heart-wrenching. We found a little solace in the planning of her celebration of life. I mean, I say we planned it, but my mother-in-law was a meticulous planner. So she kind of had planned the entire celebration herself, and she left it in a file called a going away file, and she had written out the entire service. And I remember reading that and seeing music, Chad sing Shining Stars. And I was gutted. I was honored, but I was also a little confused. I mean, I knew she loved that song because she had requested it several times at my shows and I'd sang it for her. But I couldn't gather why it meant so much to her, especially for a celebration of life. I was very nervous to get up there in that gymnasium filled with people who loved her, including her parents, her husband, her children and grandchildren. I mean, I choked up halfway through it. I pushed on, and I sat back down in that metal chair in that gymnasium next to my wife, and she patted me on the back and said I did a wonderful job. And then I remember her casually just crossing her legs, and I looked down and I noticed her familiar tattoo that's just on her ankle of a simple little star. And it's the same tattoo that all of the women in her immediate family had gotten before I'd even met them. Shining stars. Suddenly all made sense. And I learned a very valuable lesson through this as a writer. To leave a window open for the song to go out and find its own power in others, but also so it can come back in and teach me, the writer. All in all, this life of writing love songs for a living has rewarded me in the most unexpected ways. It's brought me to a deeper connection to humanity through its pursuit. The lyrics, the melodies, the performances, all just serve as tools to connect with others' hearts. I've dedicated my entire life to this, to describing the interior world we all share. And it's offered me many chances to understand a little more deeper the mysteries of love. But they remain just that, of course. A complete mystery. A mystery that beckons me to keep writing, keep searching, keep learning, and especially keep singing. So that someday, hopefully, this tapestry of songs that I've written may bring some deeper answers to some of life's most simple questions. Like, how's the weather? Thank you. Thank you.
Great job. Good job. Thank you so much, Chad. We're so thankful to you and songwriters everywhere for bearing their souls. Before I introduce our last storyteller, a reminder you can hear all of tonight's stories again on our podcast on iTunes and Stitcher. Watch them on MC22 or read a version of their story on DesMoinesRegister.com. Last but not least, I'd like to introduce Lea Collins, who will share a story on recognizing our differences.
I'm sitting in a hot tub at a public pool with Steve. It's his birthday. We've been dating about 6 months. All the fixings for hot fudge sundaes await us at my apartment. The year, 1995. I turn to him and I say, I'm kind of nervous to know your opinion about same-sex marriage. He looks at me and says, I'm against it. I cringe inside. My heart sinks. I knew there was a reason I did not want to ask this question, which is exactly why I had to ask it. We drive to my place in silence. The car idling in the street, Steve turns to me and says, look, I know you're really upset about what I just said. Why don't we skip the Sundays, and you can get back to me when or if you ever feel like it. Now it's my turn to idle. As an out and outspoken bisexual feminist, his view is antithetical to everything I believe. How could he say this to me? As we used to say in the 90s, love is love. But I didn't want to skip the Sundays. I liked Steve. I liked him a lot, and it was his birthday, and there was all this ice cream in my freezer. So I turned to him and I said, look, you're right, I'm really upset about what you said, and I don't know what I'm gonna do about it. But for tonight, it's your birthday. Let's celebrate. After he left and I was alone with my thoughts, I asked myself, how did I get here? I got here by way of the engineering building where I had gone 9 months earlier to interview with 2 male senior faculty members for the position of graduate student representative on the presidential search committee. Convinced I was the token lesbian, I decided to dress the part. From my $10 Goodwill baggy black dress to my long johns with holes in them, and of course, my hiking boots. As I stood in the hallway waiting for these guys to show up, staring at some incomprehensible engineering poster, a voice from behind me says, Leah Haravan, it's nice to finally meet you. I turn around slowly, give him the once over, and say, which one are you? I'm the good-looking one, is Steve's response. And he had me. Not because he was, in fact, good-looking. He was tall, skinny, bald, and male. Not my type. He had me because he was funny, clever, quick on his feet, not intimidated by me, and most importantly, could give it as good as I could. And thus began our friendship. We're all wrong for each other. He's 47, I'm 27. He's 6 feet tall, I'm 4'9". He's from Indiana, I'm from New York. He's Catholic, I'm Jewish. His people come from the hills of Tennessee. I'm a first-generation daughter of immigrants. He's a scientist, I'm a philosophy major. He does calculus problems for fun. I problematize the gender binary. He's to the right, I'm to the left, and worst of all, we only have one letter in common on the Myers-Briggs personality inventory. Oh, and he's a man. Now, as a bisexual, I was open to dating men, but I figured if I would date a man, it would be a granola-eating, Birkenstock-wearing. Not Steve. We agree on nothing. Well, we agree on one thing, which is how much we love talking to each other about all the things we disagree on. And talk we did. We debated, challenged, argued, and learned. And Steve was hands down the best listener I had ever met. When we weren't talking about our political differences, we joked about our other ones. One time he said to me, "Well, of course you don't want to date me. I'm a dead white male." Another time, I said to him, "I don't really think we should date because I have a height requirement for men and you are too tall." Without missing a beat, Steve looked at me and said, "You know, you might be right about that one. I also have a height requirement for women. I really like short women. And you're too tall." We laughed a lot and felt very connected to each other. At the same time, I was kind of living a double life with one foot in the lesbian community and the other exploring this relationship with Steve. My friends and I agreed on everything but this. Their reluctance to see me date a dead white male mirrored my own. I was, after all, sleeping with the enemy. And it became harder and harder to talk to my friends about this relationship. But strangely, I felt more like I could be myself around Steve, who didn't share my views on anything, than I did with my friends who shared my views on everything. I agonized about this. I worried. I wondered if I was making a mistake, selling out, missing something. And meanwhile, Steve was coming to a realization of his own. He was in the process of deciding that he wanted to marry me. Something my friends would definitely be against. It seemed like everybody had a position on marriage, and none of them made sense to me. There were many breakups and many marriage proposals, including the one where he showed up on my parents' doorstep in New York in a full tux. We had broken up about 3 days before this, and I had just shaved off all my hair. He got down on one knee, looked up into my bald face, and said, "I know you're not ready to make this decision right now, but could you please just hang on to this ring while you're thinking about it?" In between all these marriages and breakups, I visited the oracle of all things love and marriage, the Hallmark card store. I parked myself in the wedding and anniversary aisle, and I read every inscription. And they said things like, "With you, it was love at first everything, and from the moment I saw you, I knew," and if this is what marriage is, I should definitely not do it. Steve and I didn't make sense, and these cards didn't make sense either. In between these various trips to Hallmark, I went home again to New York to talk to my parents. I was sitting with my dad in my childhood bedroom, on my childhood bedspread. Childhood bedspread. Still oddly brightly colored with those 1970s flowers, just as bright as 20 years ago. And I told my dad about all the problems I was having with Steve, all the disagreements, difficulties, debates. And he said to me, "I know you, and I know that no matter who you were with, you would come to me with a list of problems." Yeah, Dad. When you see happiness, he said, grab it. And I heard the arthritic crack of his fingers. And I saw his wedding ring in the light. I went down to the kitchen to talk to my mom. My mom is more the pragmatist to my dad's romantic. And she told me that the secret to a good marriage is twofold. Marry late and chemistry, which is kind of a weird thing to hear your mom say. Behind her in the kitchen, I noticed this old cork board they had. It was full of thumbtacks and little cards, you know, the kind that come with bouquets. They were from flowers my dad had given my mom over the years for wedding anniversaries, birthdays, and New Year's. And each card said on it, Încă Caramida, which in Romanian, their language, means another brick. It comes from a poem they both like, which says, happiness and love is built, love is forged brick by brick, and heart by heart. I thought about this idea of grabbing happiness and forging love. I thought about the idea that marriage is hard and there are gonna be problems, and maybe the best trick is to find someone with whom you can have those problems. I thought back to that horrible hot tub birthday. And I wondered if maybe just as those Hallmark cards didn't apply to me, maybe other ideas about relationships don't apply to me either. What if agreement is overrated and disagreement is underrated? What if difference can strengthen a relationship? What if people who are all wrong for each other aren't really? What if love is love? Well, I finally accepted marriage proposal number 4. He rented the tux again. This time he proposed to me at a Romanian restaurant in Chicago, in Romanian, but that's another story. 24 years and 4 very independent-minded children later, the relationship still, in many ways, does not make sense. But in many beautiful, difficult, growthful, and joyful ways, it does. Both of these are true. My choice is to hold these truths alongside each other as Steve and I build a life, brick by brick, and heart by heart. Thank you.
Thank you, Leah. What a beautiful tale of everlasting love. I'd like to invite all the storytellers and their coaches on stage for a bow. But first, I want to tell you about our upcoming shows this year and what we're calling our second, 5th season, right here at Hoyt Sherman Place. On April 26th, we will present Growing Up, Celebrating Family and Culture. And on June 14th, Voyages, Life-Changing Experiences Through Travel. We are actively looking for storytellers, and anyone can do this. Come see any of our coaches after the show if you're interested. I'd like to thank our coaches who are coming out now, I hope, my colleagues at the Des Moines Register who helped guide all of our storytellers tonight. I appreciate their hard work and dedication to this community project. I'd also like to acknowledge all of tonight's wonderful storytellers who spent hours on their stories and came tonight with open hearts and minds. They're all here behind me, and we're gonna take a bow. Great job, guys.